never really seen before in total war or world history. So they predominantly armed the Soviets, but we did use selective mules in the Pacific Theater and very selective mules in Sicily and Italy, but those mules were actually procured locally. So my wife's grandfather, Rex Rainey, he was Sergeant Major in the Thunderbird Division, raised here in Colorado, and he served in Sicily and Italy, and he talked to me about those mules. They loved them. They were basically soldiers, and they relied on them as pack animals. And he said that they felt bad that when they would die in combat, but that they didn't go to waste. And his son is sitting here, my father-in-law and mother-in-law and my wife, but he, which makes sense. I mean, they would have been pretty hungry. So we did use very small amounts of mules in the Second World War, but we still use horses in modern militaries. Fort Carson here still has a cavalry unit, true cavalry. The Canadians still have a true cavalry unit. The Chinese still have true cavalry. We used horses in Kosovo, in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, and a lot of mules in Afghanistan too, up in the mountains as pack animals. So they still do serve a very specific niche in modern militaries.
Tim, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
History professor Tim Weingard of Colorado Mesa University has written The Horse, a galloping history of humanity. We read it together for our book series, Turn the Page. Thanks to our hosts at CMU, to audio engineer Pedro Lumbrano, events coordinator Kayla Montoya Manzo, and Western Slope producer Tom Hess. In Grand Junction, I'm Ryan Morton with CPR News and KRCC.
This is CPR News, 89.5 FM, KPRN Grand Junction, 88.3 FM, KPRH Montrose, 88.3 FM, KPYR Craig, and at CPR.org.
Support comes from Right Water Engineers, helping governments, agriculture, industry, and special districts address the long-term impacts of increased climate variability. Learn more at rightwater.com.
I don't know why I didn't start
I'm
thinking
Stuart
50
Vanderbilt,
years
President
earlier,
of
but I
Colorado
started
Public
thinking
Radio.
yesterday.
Our team did extraordinary work this election season covering local, state, and national issues and races. And you used and shared that report. Thank you. Our work doesn't stop at the ballot box, though. Now our job is to report on the impact and the outcome and to hold the powerful to account.
I
Your
wouldn't
support
mind
means CPR
keeping
can
this
do that
place
essential
for
work
storage
and answer only to you
and for
and
an
the
extra
truth.
place
Add your support
for
at
fishing and all that other
CPR.org.
stuff when kids get older.
What does a second Donald Trump presidency mean for the world? In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says Trump's close relationship with Vladimir Putin won't erode his country's resolve.
It is up to Ukraine to decide what should and should not be on the agenda for ending this war.
In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum also says,
to all Mexicans, there is no reason for concern. There's absolutely no reason to worry.
And in China,
celebratory notes from Chinese social media talking about this is proof of America's further decline. So China would be able to take advantage of this historic opportunity.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Today on Point, of course, who Americans put in the White House does have an impact on the rest of the world. We'll look at how Europe, Mexico, and China are preparing for Donald Trump's return. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Republicans are on the cusp of retaining control of the House, which would give the GOP a trifecta come January. Control over both chambers of Congress and the White House. Speaker Mike Johnson says it's time to move on and turn the page in the next Congress.
This is something that the American people desperately need and deserve. We are going to raise an America First banner above this place. And you saw a demographic shift that I was talking about on the campaign trail for over a year, who came on board with us because they believed in what we were saying. They believed the answers that we were providing for all the great challenges facing the country.
Republicans are closer to claiming House control. 218 seats are needed to hold the majority. President-elect Donald Trump has signaled there could be big changes coming to the Justice Department and the FBI. NPR's Carrie Johnson reports on the transition process.
The Attorney General is going to be the most important job after the president's in the next administration. That's according to Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Trump's considering a number of candidates, including Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Eric Schmidt of Missouri. Longtime Washington lawyer Mark Paoletta, a close friend of Justice Clarence Thomas, is also in the mix to lead the Justice Department. FBI Director Chris Wray has more than 2 years left on his term, but he's had a tense relationship with Trump, who may want to replace him. An FBI official tells NPR Wray continues to oversee day-to-day operations and is actively planning to lead the Bureau into next year and beyond. Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
Saudi Arabia has hosted leaders from the Middle East and Muslim-majority countries for a summit. They ended with a statement calling for a halt of global arms shipments to Israel and for its suspension at the United Nations. NPR's Aya Batrawi reports the summit did not commit nations to abide by specific measures.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman opened the summit by reaffirming support for a Palestinian state, denouncing Israeli attacks on Iran, and accusing Israel of carrying out a, quote, genocide in Gaza, which Israel denies. Arab leaders, many of whom are opposed to Hamas, have been divided on how to contain the war, which has spread to Lebanon. And countries like Egypt and the UAE have kept ties with Israel, even using their ports for Israeli shipments throughout the war. The summit is the second of its kind to be held in Riyadh since the Hamas-led attacks of last year that killed 1,200 people in Israel. Israel's military has since killed at least 43,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, according to Gaza's health ministry. Aya Batrawi, NPR News.
On Wall Street, the Dow was down 252 points. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Schwab, with Schwab investing themes like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, or pet passion. Over 40 themes to invest in. Learn more at schwab.com. And the Doris Duke Foundation.
This is CPR News and KRCC. I'm Mike Lamp. After 6 weeks away, the U.S. House and Senate return today with a big to-do list. CPR's Caitlin Kim reports.
Topping the list will be disaster funding in the wake of 2 hurricanes that battered the southeast. There's also a government funding measure to pass before December 20th. Congress will try to continue its streak and pass the National Defense Authorization Act, a defense policy bill Congress has passed every year for more than 60 years. But several other issues remain up in the air, such as the Farm Bill or a bill to tackle growing concerns over AI. In Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Kim, CPR News.
Colorado voters approved about half of school district funding measures this year. CPR's Jenny Brundin has more.
About half of the 41 measures passed, but only 11 were tax increases for school operations. In contrast, most of the large bond proposals in big districts like Denver, Aurora, and Cherry Creek passed. Tracy Rainey is with the Colorado School Finance Project, which keeps a tally of all the school board races.
Any time that you can go to your voters and not have to raise taxes is always a much simpler message.
Districts structured their bonds in a way that it wouldn't mean a new or higher tax, but some property tax increases prevailed. Montezuma-Cortez District passed its first mill levy override ever. Jenny Brundin, CPR News.
Federal health officials want more testing of workers on farms where animals are infected with bird flu. A new study found some dairy workers showed signs of infection even when they didn't report feeling sick. Dr. Nirav Shah says the CDC recommends farm workers wear protective gear around sick or infected animals.
Simply put, the higher risk activities will call for more PPE use.
The research suggests the virus has infected more humans than the 46 U.S. farm workers identified so far, including 10 in Colorado. This is CPR News and KRCC.
This is On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. What does a second Donald Trump presidency mean for the world? Meeting with European leaders in Hungary last week, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Trump's close relationship with Russia's Vladimir Putin won't erode his country's resolve.
It is up to Ukraine to decide what should and should not be on the agenda for ending this war.
In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum also reassured her nation.
To all Mexicans, there is no reason for concern. To our fellow citizens, their families here, Mexican businesswomen and businessmen, there's absolutely no reason to worry. Mexico always moves forward. We are a free, independent, and sovereign country, and there will be a good relationship with the United States.
And in China, Mao Ning with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave this statement to the media. Quote, President Xi Jinping has congratulated U.S. President-elect Trump. President Xi Jinping pointed out that history has shown that both sides of China and the U.S. gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. A stable, sound, and sustainable relationship serves the interests of both countries and meets the expectations of the international community, end quote. Now, of course, who Americans put in the White House does have a very large impact on the rest of the world. So today we are going to focus on how Europe, Mexico, and China are preparing for Donald Trump's return. And we will begin with Ukraine and Europe. Jessica Berlin joins us. She's Senior Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, and she's in Berlin, Germany. Jessica, welcome to On Point.
Hi, Megan.
So right after the announcement that Donald Trump, now President-elect Donald Trump, had won the election last week, what was your first reaction?
Well, over here, I think the reaction could be summarized with the word dread. Whether people are identifying on the more liberal or conservative end of the spectrum was not so much as issue, rather than the sense that Donald Trump is an unstable and destabling factor in international affairs, as was experienced during his first administration. And also, of course, for Europe, he's made very clear signals that he doesn't have great faith in the NATO alliance. He's openly support and defend European NATO members should they be attacked. So there's certainly a great deal of concern over here. That being said, however, it's always been clear throughout this election that a second Trump administration was perfectly possible. And likely. The polls were very close, and it was clear that he might indeed win a second term. So also governments here have been preparing, and even if they're not thrilled necessarily to be faced with this situation, they will get on with it. And European relations with the United States go far beyond any one president. So we are allies. Our economies, our national securities are intertwined, and that doesn't change just because of this election.
Yeah, history is much longer than one presidency. Point well taken. But focusing on Ukraine for a few moments here, Jessica, as you know, the president-elect during the campaign repeatedly said that he would end Russia's war in the Ukraine in, quote, 24 hours. Didn't really say how he would do that. Sometimes he said he could just pick up the phone and make one phone call. But however, I'm seeing here that just yesterday, Finnish President Alexander Stubb had a call with President-elect Trump. And following that call, he told Bloomberg, so this is a report from Bloomberg, that the Finnish president said that he advises Europe to take seriously the intentions of Trump to get a peace deal sooner rather than later. Now, I don't think there were more details in terms of what Trump said to Stubb, but your response to that?
Donald Trump talks a lot. That's the first thing I'll say. We need to take his statements with a grain of salt, as you yourself pointed out. The fact that he says
reporters
that
like
he
Donald
wants,
Trump talks a lot.
that he could end the war with a phone call on day one.
Talks a lot. They're talking about
that's a lot of big talk, but it won't be possible. And he knows it. So I think statements like this, making the space of him trying to position himself.
Okay, what did you say?
Like he's upholding his promises,
talking about
and doing what
the relationship's going to be between these countries like China and Europe and stuff like that. Now that Trump is back in the office, he's talking about things that need to happen, or what ideas he's been slinging out. because he said a lot of things in the campaign, like he's going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, and that's what they were talking about now. And the reporter's like, well, Trump talks a lot, so, whether or not it happens, it is just funny.
Ukraine and telling them to make a deal is not going to make them accept that deal. And even if Trump would take some sort of drastic, radical step and stop delivering aid to Ukraine, that doesn't mean the rest of the world would. Certainly doesn't mean Europe would. So, and it certainly doesn't mean that the Ukrainian people would stop fighting.
Right.
They also have a flourishing defense industry that has only grown during this conflict. So, would it be incredibly damaging? Yes. But would it end the war on day one? No. And as Trump reaches out to other world leaders and European leaders, he will certainly continue to make statements, and the media cycle will jump on them and try to interpret them. But as we know from the last Trump administration, he is very unpredictable. Things he says one day change the next. So I think what we need to do is consider these statements in their context. What is Trump trying to convey? What is his short-term goal in this situation? And for the case of European leaders, and of course, in particular for Ukraine, they'll have to try to frame America's engagement with European states and on Ukraine aid as transactional and a deal. As long as Trump and his administration always feel like they're coming out the winner, and having a good deal, quote unquote, I think that'll be the path forward.
Can I just jump in here, Jessica?
Like this don't hold very much weight.
Yeah, so point well taken. I think there's a profound difference between grandiose statements, right, made during a campaign in any country, but especially in the United States, versus the real politic of ending a war. But in terms of reality, yes, obviously a war is not going to come to a conclusion on January 20th just because there's a different president of the United States. But if we put some pieces together here, today in the U.S., the news is that it's highly likely that Trump will name Senator Marco Rubio as his desired Secretary of State. And Marco Rubio, as senator, voted against a $60 billion U.S. aid package for Ukraine. That package did pass in April of this year, but Rubio voted against it. And just after Trump's election, he also said that Rubio said this, that he thinks the war in Ukraine has reached a stalemate and needs to be brought to a conclusion. So again, speaking in terms of reality, if that is the U.S.'s posture going forward, what impact might that have on any peace negotiations as they play out between Russia, Ukraine, and the various European states that would be involved with that? Would that put pressure to come to a conclusion that perhaps is not, or a deal, as you say, that's not to Ukraine's liking?
It'll certainly put Ukraine and Ukraine's allies under pressure. They'll be needing to show wins on the battlefield and momentum, because then the framing to the incoming administration will need to be, look, if you want to end this fight sooner, give us the aid to do it. This is the quickest way to victory and the quickest way to peace, is by supporting us and not by cutting and running and forcing us into...
Jessica?
Excuse me, the connection just dropped.
Yeah,
there.
just dropped, but we got you back, thank goodness. Continue, go ahead.
So that will push them into accepting a peace treaty with Russia that is really actually just setting up the board for Russia to rearm and strike again. So Ukraine will certainly be under pressure to deliver wins, and above all, European allies will be under pressure to aid Ukraine more. That, however, it has everything to do with European countries' own complacency and inaction over these past 8 years. All since the first Trump administration, it was clear that this day might come. And we might face a U.S. government, with or without Trump in the White House, that is no longer heavily investing in European defense. So we over here, we do need to step up. we've squandered 8 years of time to do so when the writing was on the wall back then.
Yeah, can I just jump in here, Jessica?
Just increased.
Yeah, and forgive me for interrupting. I'm just a little feeling a little more aggressive in my questioning because of the instability of the line, that's all. But I want to just note that today, the current Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is heading to Brussels, or is expected to be in Brussels, to have talks about exactly this. Is there a possibility, I know there's some European analysts who are saying maybe the thing to do is to try to advance some kind of peace deal before Donald Trump takes office again? I mean, is that a sense that's realistic in Europe?
So it's certainly something that's circling and it's being discussed, but it is not realistic because this is the decision of the Ukrainians.
Yes.
And when we talk about deal, let's just be clear, what a lot of these politicians mean is Ukraine should sacrifice territory that is currently occupied by Russia in exchange for a ceasefire. So that would be like if the U.S. and Mexico were at war and Mexico was occupying, half a dozen U.S. states along the southern border, and to say, well, for peace, we're going to let Mexico keep those states and make the Americans living on those occupied states live under Mexican rule from now on, because then we'll have a ceasefire. And just as ridiculous as that sounds to you and your audience, that's exactly how ridiculous that sounds to Ukrainians.
Yeah, well,
they
Jessica,
say we're not going to abandon our people and our land.
Yes. So hold on here for a second. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to pick up the conversation regarding China's view on the new Trump administration, and there are obviously some major links between China and Europe on several fronts, both war and trade. So we'll be right back. This is On Point.
Support comes from Grand Valley Primary Care and Grand Valley Pediatrics, offering a full range of primary care and pediatric care services for the entire family. Learn more at yourcommunityhospital.com.
CPR thanks the many businesses, nonprofits, and arts groups that support the station through sponsorship. Learn more about connecting to CPR's audience and how to become a sponsor at cpr.org/sponsorship.
Morning Edition from NPR News helps you start your day informed and even inspired. Wake up to broader horizons. Listen to Morning Edition every weekday.
Weekday mornings until 9 on KRCC and CPR News.
Support for On Point comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and Landmark College, offering professional development for educators, including an online graduate-level certificate in learning differences and neurodiversity. More at landmark.edu/certificate. And Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com.
You're back with On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, and today we're looking at three very important regions around the world: Europe, China, and Mexico, and how those countries and regions are preparing for President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House. Jessica Berlin joins us. She's in Germany. She's a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. And Jessica, stick with us for a few more minutes because, as I said earlier, there's a lot of overlap in terms of considerations that various nations have to make with the new Trump presidency. And now, on that note, I'd like to bring in Yongyong Chong. She's a fellow and research scholar at Yale Law School's Paul Tsai China Center. Yongyong, it's wonderful to have you back on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's focus a little bit on the U.S.'s role in terms of foreign conflicts. And the reason why I want to start there is, what do you estimate the reaction is from the Chinese government, from President Xi, that Donald Trump, for years now, has been saying, he doesn't want to be involved in any wars. He can stop a war in Ukraine with a phone call, real or not. but essentially his tacit support of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Does President Xi see that as a sign that the U.S. wouldn't intervene if China decided to increase its aggression towards Taiwan?
I think our Katie wants
This
to.
is a really great question, and it's also a complicated one because
She's
U.S.
right
government,
there,
with regards to
towards
its
the door.
policy towards Taiwan, in light of this election outcome, is fragmented. On one hand, there is the long-standing Republican base and the foreign policy establishment that are very pro-Taiwan. And some of that signals are also seen in terms of Donald Trump's staffing choices with Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor, as you mentioned, Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, and these are very hawkish individuals who have traditionally been very pro-Taiwan. Of course, to serve in the Trump administration and to stay in that position, often it is more important to be loyal rather than to be policy consistent in terms
Randy,
of policy.
just throw her inside really quick.
Rhetoric towards Ukraine as well, so there is an uncertainty. On the other hand, there is also a growing isolationist faction within
Randy,
the Republican Party
put her inside.
represented by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance.
Whatever.
And to an extent, their voter base are also what pushed the ticket into power. And we saw, for example, this year, the Republican GOP convention platform was the first time since 1980 that did not mention Taiwan explicitly. And so that is notable as well. And of course, for the most important factor is probably still Donald Trump himself. And then we see how he often speaks of Taiwan in such a transactional tone that is less seeing Taiwan as a strategic partner or in terms of democratic values, but more as this kind of weaker partner that can be extolled for protection money. And of course, these are all things that Beijing is observing. And then there is also a wild card that is Elon Musk and to an extent Vladimir Putin. And we do know that, for example, Elon Musk has somehow told like SpaceX suppliers to move out of Taiwan out of geopolitical uncertainty. There is also being reported that Vladimir Putin reportedly passed on messages from Beijing to Elon Musk to not activate the Starlink satellite system as a favor to Xi Jinping. So these are very uncertain elements, and of course China is watching and seeing what are the opportunities there.
Okay.
Yang, you always bring the entire package to the table. Wow, that was a lot. Jessica,
this stupid thing
core,
uses
one of the things that
adaptive.
you're pointing out here is not just in terms of Donald Trump's
Green